difference. A big difference was independent learning. Like in high school, I know like everyone would tell me this, but I didn't fully grasp how independent I was expected to be. There's a syllabus and there's a timetable, but the lecturers aren't going to ask you like, hey, like, do you need help? Like, what are you struggling with by yourself? Like, tell me and I'll help you through it. A lot of it was like I'm teaching you content. Come here if you need help. And then if you don't need help, then like that's fine. Then you're doing well, right? And so there are all these resources that are available to you, and it's up to you to access those resources, right? They're not going to come to you, and that's an expectation. The third difference was depth. Like every course that you do in uni is really focused on that specific topic or that specific subject, and you just dive deep. And you're going to be doing 3-4 courses or 2 to 4 courses at the same time, and that means that you're going to be diving deep into each one separately, which might be quite different to high school. For example, I know like the 3-unit syllabus was like you do statistics, and in statistics you do the binomial distribution, right? And that's it. Like that's just statistics in high school. But in uni, like binomial distribution is one lecture slide in one lecture of your entire course, and so it can be quite different. You're going into like, hey, I'm going to be teaching you statistics. Here are all the distributions that we kind of think about and we use to model the world, and these are all the problems associated with each one, and we're going deep into this problem, right? And that's what I mean by there's a difference in high school content and the depth of uni, right? And finally, there's the pace, right? Everyone talks about how fast uni is, and you don't really get it until you experience it. It's so easy, like you'll blink in class and you miss a slide and suddenly you don't understand the rest of the lesson. And you don't understand the rest of the lesson, so then you don't go to the rest of the week's classes, and then you don't catch up in time for next week, and suddenly you're 4 weeks behind in a 10-week course. It happens to everyone. I don't think I've met anyone who hasn't had that experience. So just be prepared. And I like really felt it in first year, because I remember spending like 2-3 weeks in high school on integration by parts. Like we were just working on integration by parts in school for like the longest time. And then in uni, they were like, okay, we're going through integration today. It's a 1-hour lecture. It's like all the things like integration by parts, integration by substitution, integration by like inspection. Like we're doing everything. Okay, we've finished integration, moving on. Right. And then I was like, oh, in 1 hour, we covered essentially 3 months worth of high school content. Right. So that's a kind of glimpse of what the pace is like in uni. As for what to expect in a week, I've got up there like a screenshot of a example timetable for 1 week. You're doing 3 courses. So typically each course you're doing lectures and tutorials. Lectures are, big rooms, bigger than this usually. You're talking like 200-300 people in a session, and a lecturer standing up there with a projector and teaching you content. And you can raise hands and ask questions if you're brave, but most of the time it's pretty quiet. And then afterwards, there will be a separate 1-hour session where you do a tutorial. And that's like 25, 20 people in a smaller classroom where you get to be face-to-face with a tutor. And that's an opportunity for you to cover exercises and do questions and ask questions face-to-face. So that's the general structure of a uni course. You learn content in a lecture for 2 hours-ish, and then you'll go to a different room and you'll sit down in a small class for 1 hour and do exercises or see how an exercise is done. And typically lectures are recorded. So a lot of people will go first 1-2 weeks, and then they're just at home, and then you can watch it at home because it's recorded at your own pace. And typically the benefit is that you can pause. So I don't get it. Okay, I'm going to stop and like really study the slide and think about it myself and then keep watching. Or if you're really like, you left everything to the last minute, you can watch on 2 times speed, 3 times speed, and crunch through 10 weeks of lectures in 3 hours, right? That's pretty possible. So figure out what works for you, but that's the kind of structure. Tutorials usually aren't recorded, but some of them will have like attendance, but for the most part, maths tutorials don't mark attendance. So it's up to you if you want to show up. They're a resource, and you need to choose if you're going to use that resource, right? Yeah, and in terms of volume, so most lectures, you'll have 2 lectures a week, 2-ish hours a lecture. So you have like 4 to 5 hours per week, and then 1 hour tutorial. You've got additional self-study. So that means that with 3 courses at the same time, you're doing 17 to 19 contact hours, which doesn't sound a lot. Like when you're looking at it outside of uni, you're like, outside of high school, you're like, I went to school for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Like, how bad is 17 hours? But again, the pace and the volume is different. So don't slack off too much. You can save time if you don't go to class, of course, but you have to catch up in your own time. Yeah. Recording? Yeah, it's recording. Common challenges. So this is very much related to the differences that I mentioned earlier. A big challenge was abstract concepts. So again, like it's very different to high school. You're dealing with these abstract problems. And my tip for solving this is you want to actively engage in class or actively engage with the problem. You don't necessarily have to ask questions. Not everyone is like brave enough or wants to ask questions in front of 300 people, but at least actively engage with the content and try to process it yourself. That's the best way to get through abstract ideas. And you can always find resources that can shed new light or new ways of looking at certain concepts. So one of these is 3 Blue 1 Brown. Yeah, 3 Blue 1 Brown's a YouTube channel. They do some really sick visualizations and explanations of various concepts. They have a whole playlist on linear algebra and a whole playlist on calculus. And I found it really helpful to kind of look at it from a different angle. Like you're not just dealing with Greek letters on a piece of paper, right? It's actual visualized in a different way than what you might be taught. And that helps you process things. And finally, like pay attention to the notation, right? Like Greek letters are difficult in the best of times. If you're already struggling with a concept and you don't have a strong grasp of the notation, it's basically impossible, right? It's like reading a book and you don't know the language. I would really encourage you to spend time with notation. It's not always standard. Some courses will teach it differently. So you should really spend time to understand the language. And that's something that like I didn't learn until basically my 5th year. And it would have been so much easier if I like dedicated an hour just to like figure out, okay, which symbols mean what and what's the system that they use, because it'll help you understand it so much better. Staying on schedule. So again, in terms of pace and volume, it's really hard to stay on schedule. Like I said, it's almost inevitable that you'll fall behind. So how do you deal with that is working on time management. You do fall behind, just try your best to like catch up before it snowballs out of control and prioritize the deadlines that matter. So like, oh, maybe like a tutorial is fine if I miss it, but I shouldn't miss a midterm, right? And if I do miss a midterm, then maybe is there a way for me to work around it? Like, can I catch up later on in terms of marks and stuff like that? And find a method that works for you. So I don't work well with cramming. I know some people really like to cram, and like my girlfriend really likes to cram. Like she basically doesn't do anything on time, and she'll just like, okay, it's like 11 p.m. This is my time to shine. I'm gonna like grind until 4 a.m. And then she'll do that like 3 days before the exam, right? But I found that method actually gave me worse results, and I was stressed, right? Like I was stressed out of my mind, and my marks were worse than if I studied for an hour a day for 10 weeks. But not everyone is interested in doing that, and not everyone is willing to sacrifice like 1 hour every single day to study or 3 hours every day to study. So find what works for you, find what like reduces your stress the most, and reduces or increases your marks the most. And again, independent learning. So working on your habits is really helpful, and finding your study group, finding a study buddy is really helpful. If you have someone that you can go to when you're not sure, and you can bounce questions and ideas and answers off each other, it helps a lot. and use your tutors and your lecturers and other such resources. If you're not familiar, like lecturers tend to have consultation times. So like every course, they'll say like on Wednesdays from 9 to 10, my door is open, right? You can go to the office and walk through their door and like ask them questions every week. And they promise that they'll be available during that hour. And that's like a really helpful resource. Oh, I didn't understand the lecture, something in the lecture. I'll go out and ask in person instead of being shy and like not wanting to raise my hand in a lecture hall. It can be a lot easier to understand if you go up and ask something face-to-face privately. It's easier to understand. And then overcoming frustration, like it can be very frustrating in maths courses, where especially if you're learning something for the first time, you can just feel like, oh, they didn't give me solutions. I didn't understand the lecture. I didn't understand the question in the tutorial set. How the hell am I going to like answer this question? Like, I don't even know how I should start. And you start like banging your head against the wall. That's really common. Don't be too discouraged, right? I can't say like, don't get discouraged. Like you will feel discouragement, but try to work through it and try to like cut yourself some slack, right? Oh, I don't have to understand it first pass, right? That's like a really high expectation. If you can understand on the first pass, that's great. If you don't, cut yourself some slack, take a break, do something else, come back. You might find that it'll process over time. And again, like ask people for help, right? Like ask your tutor, go to the drop-in center. So if you're not sure what the drop-in center is, the faculty sets up a room in the Red Center. And I think like 1 hour a week or like 3 hours a week, something like that. You can go in and they have tutors. They sit there and it's homework help. You just go in like, oh, I don't know how to do this question. Like, can you help me? And then you've got some like 50-year honest student who like signed up to get paid and it's like answering your questions, right? So that's really helpful. Make sure you use that because once you start getting into like higher years, the questions sometimes a little too difficult for even those students to help you with, right? But first year courses are fine. And finally, like staying motivated. This is related to overcoming your frustration, but try to set achievable goals. Don't be like, I'm going to do 4 weeks worth of tutorials in like 6 hours, right? Like that is pretty unachievable, right? It will be hard, and try to study consistently, find your study buddy, find a study group, and try to enjoy what you're learning, right? It's not just about like, I need to get 94 and I need to beat my friend, blah, blah. Like those are good motivations, but try to at least enjoy what you're learning, right? Try to see beyond just the mark and say like, this is something that's actually useful in the real world or something that's interesting to learn. And that'll keep you going far longer than, oh, like, I just want to graduate, right? So those are kind of my 5 challenges that I faced and that a lot of my friends faced and some tips for dealing with it. And as far as resources go, I already mentioned the Maths Drop-In Center. Highly recommend going there if you need help. And they'll talk about it in the first year courses. They'll talk about it, but just keep it in mind. And MathSoc runs end of term workshops for a lot of courses. So you can hit up Tim and hit up Sharon. They'll point you in the right spot. The timetable app that I used for the screenshot earlier on, that's by the campus Bible study group. It's called Cross Angles. It's a really helpful app. Like you can visualize your schedule and search up like, I'm doing these courses. Can I like move around what to pick out a timetable that works for you? And I would highly encourage using that. And Lost on Campus. You've probably seen this already, like Student VIP has this app. And if you want to avoid getting lost on campus, you can use this app. I mostly use it to find toilets because a lot of the really like ground floor toilets were really gross, especially in the engineering buildings. You can use it to find like toilets that are out of the way and they're much cleaner and quieter and like, yeah, better time. And like ARC has lots of opportunities and resources, whether it's like homework help or volunteering, things like that. ARC's a really good place to go. I recommend. So that is your undergraduate part. We talked a little bit about honors. Does anyone here not know how honors works? Okay. Love that. So honors is a 1-year research project. In maths, you have to do coursework. So like if you think in 1 year I have to do 8 courses, there are 5 courses that you just have to study. And then 3 courses are taken up by your thesis. And your thesis is, okay, I have a research project, I have a problem I'm trying to solve. I do that for 1 whole year, 3 whole terms that I'm working on this thesis. And you have to pick a supervisor in advance. And the idea is that you learn how to study and you learn how to research a problem independently. When I mean like researching a problem, it's researching a problem that has not yet been solved. All right, this is like, oh, there's something in the literature, there's something that's missing and that I'm trying to work on. And it's an opportunity for you to learn something new and challenge yourself and try to contribute back to kind of academia. And so for me, the main point of honors was to experience what research was like. Right? If you're interested or considering a PhD, right? Or I want to be a doctor, right? Then an honors year is a good chance for you to see what would it be like, right? Because a PhD is anywhere between 3 to 8 years. And honors is only 1 year. It's just fixed at 1 year. And so it's like, okay, what is it like to have a problem that hasn't been solved? What is it like to sit down and read paper after paper of like academic research and like try to figure out what solutions exist and what problems exist? That's an opportunity for thesis. And you're expected to basically contribute a 100% weighted report. My thesis was about 50 pages. And that was like 50 pages like of content, and then you have references and appendices, right? So you're expected to submit this report, and it is essentially 100%, and you have to do a presentation. And it's about what's the background of your problem and what are the things that I did and what did I contribute, right? And so my experience was, my thesis topic actually was developing methods for estimating extinction times. So, you know, like we've got all these mammoth fossils that have been collected over the years. Say you have like 50 mammoth fossils and you go like, when did all of the mammoths die? Like what was the extinction date? And you can develop the point was to develop some statistical approaches to guess at when did they die based off of what the data tells us, right? And so that was coming up with some methods. I learned a ton. I had a great time with my supervisor. So my supervisor was Professor David Warden. He's super smart and really chill, which I really liked. And he made my life really easy. A lot of people, if you talk to your seniors, they'll be like, honors thesis was terrible. I hated honors. I don't want to do it. It was really stressful. And so if you can find a supervisor that can make things a little easier for you, then that's a big win. Yeah. And yeah, so there's a picture of a dinosaur. I named the method that I came up with Minmi after this Australian dinosaur. Yeah, and we ended up coming up with 2 methods for estimating extinction times. They were pretty good. They beat most of the existing methods, at least according to our metrics. And I got a big fat 93. I was very happy with that, and I'm gonna brag about it. Thanks. Yeah, but of course, like, it wasn't like all daisies. Like I tried to name it Simp. I tried to name one of the methods Simp, but he wouldn't let me. He didn't get the joke. And then he was like, doesn't have to be a great name. And then I also, writing's hard. Like he was like, this sentence sounds impressive, but you should use less big words. Just say things better. And then we found a huge mistake like 3 days before the deadline. And he was like, it's too late to change it now. Let's just run with it. So it was a really good learning experience. And at the end of the day, research you'll never finish your research. Like there's always ways to improve it. So it's just something that you learn. And I had a really good time. I felt like I improved my stats knowledge and my stats skills, and I got what I wanted out of it. Yeah. So beyond uni, let's talk a bit about career app prospects, career experiences. The best thing that you can do in uni for getting a job afterwards is to do internships. Right? Internships get you on your feet in terms of work experience. So if you're not familiar with how internships work, it's like 3 to 6 months where you go on the job and you're just there to learn what the job is like and do a little bit of stuff to assist there. Most of the time they're paid. If you're not lucky and you're desperate, you might have to do an unpaid internship, right? But a lot of them are paid. And if you're actually if you're doing stuff and you're not just being trained, it's illegal to be unpaid. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, so internships give you real world experience, right? They let you see what is it like to be hands-on and do a job, work as, in that field and solve problems. And they give you an opportunity to apply what you learn to what you do as a job, right? And they give you ammunition for the interview process. So like, oh, I did an internship, and then the year after that I graduate, I'm going to find like a full-time job. If they ask you questions in the interview, you can use your internship experience as ammunition to be like, this is why you should hire me, right? I did this, like, oh, I showed that I was a leader. I showed that I can work in a team. I solved a problem when I was on my internship. So that's why they're very useful. They give you real world experience that you can lean on. And beyond that, they give you data for your personal growth, right? It lets you know like, oh, this is what I do want to do. This is what I don't want to do. This is the kind of team that I like. This is what I don't like. I have a few friends who did data science. And they're like, what's it like in investment banking? Like, what's it like to be a finance girl? She went and did finance. She did an internship for 3 months and then she hated it. She's like, great, I don't want to do it, right? That's very useful knowledge for your growth, right? Okay, I closed that book. I don't want to do it anymore, right? So you can treat internships like this kind of exploratory experience, right? As for me, I was very fortunate to do the co-op program, which baked 3 internships, into my degree. I worked at Westpac. I was doing data engineering. ASIC, I was doing data science, like natural language processing, and PwC data assurance, which was interesting, like audit support. A lot of it was explaining and presenting problems and solutions to non-technical people, right? People who don't really have maths backgrounds. You still need to explain how you do things, and that's a real challenge. And then I finally finished with an internship at Canva, and I worked there doing data analytics. Yeah, I owned a project and it was pretty cool. It's like anomaly detection. Yeah, so that was my experience. As far as okay, I did an undergraduate degree in mathematics. Like, how does maths actually relate to the real world? How is it actually used in data science in particular? So if you're familiar with Instagram, you'll notice over the years, the res is really low, but you notice over the years, they screw around with the UI. Sometimes the search bar used to be up top and then now it's at the bottom. Creating a photo used to be at the bottom in the middle, and then now it's just reels, right? So the question is okay, how do we know what change is good, right? What's a good change? Which change is what our users like and what's good for our company? And so A/B testing is a application of maths and statistics. Actually, in statistics, you would learn it as hypothesis testing. So we have a hypothesis, and I'm going to test if this hypothesis is true or not, right? And the hypothesis in a business sense, like Instagram, would be, okay, would putting the Reels button in the middle improve, the amount of time that someone spends on the app, right? Does that make a big difference? Or would they prefer to be uploading photos, right? Do people want to prefer looking at photos or uploading photos, or do they want to be watching videos, right? So that's a hypothesis. And you can run these controlled experiments where you go, okay, I'm going to pick 2,000 people globally randomly. I'm going to give them a new UI, and I'm going to see what happens to our metrics. Does the amount of time spent on the app increase? Does it decrease? Does the number of reels being created increase or decrease? And these kinds of changes can be found statistically, and you can run these controlled experiments to see, okay, this change is better, right? This change is worse. And that's why you'll see that when you use Facebook and Gmail and Instagram or Twitter, these apps will occasionally, you just get weird UI updates, right? I remember when they were screwing around with polls on Messenger. I don't know if you're familiar. There was a 3-month period where they just got rid of polls. And I have a few friends who are oh no, I can still create polls. And I was like, I can't create polls. And that's an example of the screwing around. That trying to run these experiments, right? Someone created polls as a feature and they're okay, does this actually improve the experience, right? Is this good for our company? And that's really, really interesting to see in the real world. And I heard like when you go online and you like start seeing like apps and websites, you start noticing like, oh, how come my friend doesn't have this? And how come I have it? How come I don't have it? That's an example of A/B testing, right? Training machine learning models, right? Machine learning is like the new hype, the new thing that's all over the world. It's really boils down to linear algebra and calculus. That's like basically like TLDR, like it's just linear algebra and calculus. And what I mean by that is a lot of machine learning models are trying to solve this cost function. They go like, hey, like I'm trying to learn this task. I'm going to give you answers for a problem. And this answer, there's some cost associated with it. And I want to reduce this cost, right? And the lower cost an answer gives is a better answer. So it's something like if you're like you get detention for bad behavior, right? Like the amount of time I spend in detention is like my cost function. And then you're like, okay, I'm trying to minimize the amount of like time I spend in detention. So I'm going to change my behavior to reduce the amount of time spent in detention. So machine learning models, a lot of them will be trained in this way. And of course, if you want to find the minimum of a function, the most straightforward way is to find the first derivative and use calculus. And you're like, oh, like what's so hard about finding the first derivative? Well, like not all functions are well-defined. Not all of them are exact. Not all of them have an exact form for the first derivative or even like the nth derivative. And so a lot of challenging problems are introduced to resolve that. And it becomes even harder when you're working with like random processes, like things happen probabilistically, and you still need to find a derivative for that. And there are some different methods. And as far as linear algebra goes, a lot of data is stored as vectors or interpreted as vectors and matrices. And you can make things literally thousands of times faster if you have a strong grasp of linear algebra. Like at the end of the day, your GPU and your CPU and your computer is just doing matrix multiplication, like just like millions of times a minute. And that's all linear algebra. Someone had to code that, right? So this is a video of like how a neural network is trained. So like when the lines go forward, that's like you're passing information forward, and that's a lot of algebra. And then you pass information back from your cost function, and that involves a lot of calculus. And you kind of go back and forth, and you're learning how to identify letters, right? I don't really intend on going through how like neural networks work. That is kind of boring, honestly. And finally, ChatGPT. So I like mentioned ChatGPT and AI as this kind of future-proofing question. If you're not familiar with ChatGPT, like all these headlines, it's this new chatbot, like large language model chatbot that is really good, basically. And people are scared they're going to take jobs. So yeah, if you did English Advanced last year, this was your question, or one of your questions, right? Like how does DOA represent notions arising from human experience? You can plug that into ChatGPT and it'll just give you an essay for free in 20 seconds, right? That's what I did. If it loads, yeah. Like you can chuck your 1,000-word essay responding to this following question, and you hit enter, and it'll just start writing. Like you don't need to read the text. You don't need to do anything. It'll just start writing. And so people are really worried about this, and people are like, oh, like students are going to cheat and people are going to lose their jobs because this AI can do everything, right? It's pretty good, right? Like I think it took about 40 seconds to write all 1,000 words, whereas it would take me about 40 minutes to write 1,000 words. So there's an order of magnitude difference, right? But of course, the difference here is that the quality, right? This is a large language model. What they did was they said, look at all these books and look at all this like online text. I want you to digest it and come up with a statistical model. What word would come next, right? If I give you a paragraph, what word would come next? Would there be a new line coming next? New paragraph? Like you just keep doing this statistical model. And so it boils down to really advanced predictive text, right? Like if you do predictive text on your phone, it's pretty crap, like because it only looks at the previous word. But these large language models look at like sentences, clauses, they break everything down into all these tokens, and it can look at your entire history, right? It can look at the entire book of all the light you cannot see and like try and write an essay in response to a question, right? And so that's a huge difference. But this is the architecture that they use. It's very complicated, but it uses reinforcement learning. So you can think about that in the future. And the question is like, will I be replaced by AI? And the answer is don't know. Like, depends on where you are. Probably not. Like, in the context of maths, I don't think so. And the reason for that is because maths is about critical thinking and it's about logic. AI, as it stands today, doesn't have logic. It doesn't have critical thinking. It doesn't have a baseline understanding of the words going in, because it's just numbers. Like, numbers are coming in and then it comes up with stats. Like, okay, like we have some probability of the next word coming being this. And so that's why I think that at this stage, maths is about critical thinking. Maths is about logic. ChatGPT isn't able to do that. And you can come up with really interesting, really funny responses if you search it, if you ask it to do logic puzzles, like, or like answer math proofs. I saw there was an email going around faculty that going like, someone asked, prove log3 is irrational. And it wrote out a proof, but the proof was rubbish. Like, it was just nonsense. Each line didn't make sense. And if you didn't know any maths, if you didn't have that baseline, you'd read it and go like, sounds good. Like, yes, he proved that log3 is irrational. But if you read each line as critically, you realize this guy has no idea what they're doing. It's like someone who didn't do the course walked into the final exam and just like wrote down some rubbish to try to get some marks, right? So at this stage, and I mean like literally at this minute, it's not there yet. But of course, in the future, it might get there. And that's why if you can't beat them, you should join them, right? If you're doing maths and you can code and you know stats and you know algebra and calculus, you can join the wave and help develop AI or anti-AI software, right? And so as this demand grows, like math skills will only grow in demand, which is why I think math skills are relatively future-proof. Yeah, at the end of the day, like tech is just a tool. I used it for the preso. I was like, I'm going to start with an introduction about myself and then talk about some differences between high school and uni. Like, give me some more topics, dude. Like, I need 40 minutes. So it did it. Like, this is really helpful, actually. It kind of gives you access to the entirety of like the internet's knowledge. And you have to pick as a user, like, what is rubbish, what's not rubbish, what's helpful, what's not helpful. Yeah, here's a summary of the next level. Uni maths will be very different. You'll be a bit more abstract, a bit more independent, a bit more free. Just be careful with it. And there's a bit more than just study, right? I talked about exchange, I talked about honors research, internships. There are lots of levels past this next level. So like keep your eyes and ears open. And maths opens a lot of doors, right? You've got AI, you've got tech, you've got all these different fields, lots of opportunities out there. Go nuts. Yeah. That's it. That's the end of the preso. Thanks for coming, and we can do Q&A, questions, have a chat. Yeah.
Very insightful. I hope everyone found it worthwhile to come. Thank you to those joining online as well. Very nice to have you guys today. Any questions for Victor?
Yeah. Same thing for everyone online. Like, feel free to type in questions. Yeah.
If you're planning on doing pure maths, because that's kind of the one I'm most interested in, I guess, like abstract concepts and stuff. How exactly, like in terms of like careers and stuff, what difference or whatever does it make?
Yeah, right. So the question was, if you're studying pure maths, what difference does that make in terms of career prospects? Is that right? To be honest, I don't know. I didn't do pure math. I've got a few friends who did pure math. It doesn't seem like it makes a huge difference. The skills that you learn in maths are much more about like critical thinking and that kind of analysis. And pure maths, I suppose the things that you learn in class will not necessarily be directly applicable. But the process that you took to answer those questions or the process you took to learn that content will be applicable. Of course, it depends on what you do. Like some people go into like optimization fields or research fields, and some of those will need those that pure math background. Where a friend who's like doing like, pure maths thesis was on like the best way to color a map. Like you've got like a piece of paper and you can divide it into fields and you need to like color it according to some constraints. Yeah, something like that. And it was kind of loosely related to graph theory, and that is not something that I would see as directly applicable, but I can see that the journey that she took would be would teach her a lot of skills and lessons that would be useful for work. Yeah. Yes.
Do you think that, like, while thinking of professional going on, do you think it was like sort of difficult or something, like then it's sort of like coming back?
Yeah. So was it difficult to think of a question for my thesis? No, and the reason was because I didn't actually pick my question. I didn't actually think of my question. I selected it. The majority of thesis projects are like, oh, you pick a supervisor and your supervisor has a problem and you help with that problem. Hi.
It's orientation all week here, or you finishing up now?
Yeah, we're finishing up in 5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, so I picked a supervisor and I asked him, what problems do you have? What research projects do you have? And he was like, here are all of them, anything that interests you. But I did ask, like, do people come up with their own questions? And he was like, yes, occasionally you can. But it is definitely very hard. Yeah. But if there's something you feel strongly about, like, go for it, right? Yeah.
I need to spend this project in comparison to like when you're studying lower courses.
I actually think that I spent less time on my thesis than I did normally studying. If I had to put a number, probably like on average, 1 to 2 hours a day. Which, okay, wait, that's a lot. Like maybe 1 to 2 hours every 2 days. So like 4 or 5 hours a week. Yes. Yeah, right. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone online. We'll see you around. Just kill it.